think lithium prices have bottomed. In fact, we're now seeing prices come off the bottom. There was a big stock build in China. I think they were hoping that the electric vehicle market would grow faster than it was. I mean, it has grown pretty damn fast. There were 300 automotive companies in China, I mean, building cars, mainly electric vehicles. That is now slimmed down to about 50. And in fact, the forecast is for that to cut back to about 7. So we'll see where that goes. I mean, they're not going to produce any less electric vehicles, that's for sure. They are stimulating domestic consumption, so China is going to be driving around a lot of EV cars. I think for the West, the market doesn't need to grow quite so fast. I mean, why should we? Yes, we want to clean up our cities, and that is happening at a decent pace, but we are rolling out the infrastructure that is required, and we are going to be driving electric vehicles going forwards. But I am personally quite happy to wait 2 or 3, 5 or 10 years more to get something with a much better battery in it. I mean, I think the designs, the voltages, the systems that run those electric vehicles are still evolving, and the battery chemistries are still evolving. I mean, I still think that lithium is going to be the dominant metal, and the simple reason for that is that it's very light. That's on the cathode. On the anode side, I think natural graphite will become dominant. There are issues to do with natural graphite which has slowed the development of it. Everyone's using synthetic graphite, whereas you will get better quality material from narrow vein, natural graphite mines.
I think the United States administration and their use of tariffs, whether from a negotiating standpoint or in reality, the implementation of the tariffs, is going to lead to changes in the supply chains. And in particular with lithium, I think given that the Chinese are the dominant refiners, it's going to ultimately drive refining capability. What we hope is within Africa itself, we'd like to see those refiners end up being local so that the added value is something that's spread to the local communities. But ultimately, I think it's going to lead to situations where you have countries like Canada engaging in free trade agreements with groups like, whether it's Mercosur in South America or the EU, and battery gigafactories setting up in Canada, and batteries built in Canada as opposed to the United States, which as an American, I very much regret. So I'm an old school globalist who believes in markets, free trade and competition, and just hope that these trade wars don't come about, and that this is much more about negotiation than a reality.
Today, the price of a spodumene concentrate is sitting around $800 to $900 per ton. That comes down from a level which is 2-3 years ago when there was a supply crunch for lithium, when it was at times in individual spot sales over $8,000 per ton. I don't expect prices to return to those sort of levels. Projections for the medium term are looking at $1,300 to $1,400 per ton. Last year was a particularly bad year. Prices fell all the way to under $800. However, prices have already recovered around 20%. What we're seeing is that the supply of lithium concentrate is tightening, and we expect to see the price rise through this year, albeit slowly.
China has a number of graphite mines already up and running. There's very few graphite mines up and running in the rest of the world. And the reason for that is essentially the price of your worst graphite. So graphite isn't one price, it's a basket of prices depending on the underlying flake size of your graphite. If you imagine a bowl of cornflakes as your graphite, the bigger the flake, the higher the price. So the smallest flake size today gets a price of about $400 a ton. Now, when you see the Western world, on average, can only produce graphite in any of the projects that are now developing at maybe $550, $600 a ton, it's pretty hard to make economic sense out of actually constructing those and developing those projects. China mines at an average of $250 a ton for their graphite. So it makes complete sense for them to run those mines.
Copper is an absolutely fascinating metal element. Copper is being driven longer term with the energy transition. We fundamentally believe, and there seems to be a tremendous amount of evidence, that copper prices should be accelerating and going higher in the relatively medium term, and significantly higher. The issue with copper is that in the short term, it still is used primarily in construction. And with the Chinese market suffering a bit over the past 12 to 18 months, the demand from China has dropped off. Inventories rose quite considerably. And so what you're seeing there is that market in the short term is starting to consume its inventory, and it's starting to lead to the recognition that the longer term demand supply equation is out of whack. Some copper mines need to come online and come online relatively quickly.
Trump 2.0. I think Trump 1.0, he was kind of neutral nuclear. He wasn't against it, he wasn't pro. Biden was massively pro-nuclear, but I think Trump 2.0 is going to be pro-nuclear. And I think it goes back to the data center AI story. We talk about these data centers and artificial intelligence. This really is a race between the US and China for superintelligence. And in that space, 50% of the world's data centers are in the US today. I think this falls firmly into the Trump America First theme. And his new best friend, Elon Musk, is a supporter of nuclear. So I think on that dimension, we're going to see support for nuclear. Tariffs, never a good thing. How does it influence the market more generally? I think you're going to see adjustments. If there are tariffs on uranium out of Canada, there are no tariffs from Kazakhstan. So you probably get some sort of readjustment. But I don't know how these tariffs play out, in the short and medium term. But I think Trump will be supportive of the nuclear theme because of the AI data center story. The conversion and enrichment, Russia has 35% of the world's conversion capacity and 45% of the world's enrichment capacity. Those things can be built. The technology is available, the industrial processes. So, in the medium to long term, that'll get solved. We've already seen Urana and Urenco announce expansion capacity in the enrichment space. But I think the real pinch point right now is conversion. And Cameco are now looking at their Springfields plant in the UK that I think shut in like 2012. They're looking at the feasibility of restarting that. So I think it will come, but I think in the short term that's going to be an issue. And we've seen the conversion price go from $20 up to $190. It absolutely exploded post the Ukraine invasion. The enrichment price has gone from $50 to $170. Again, an explosion in that side of the fuel chain. We haven't seen the same happen in uranium because the enrichment and conversion is much closer to the needs or the refueling needs of these power stations. So, I do believe that flow through will happen in uranium. Last year was a bit of a, kind of the spot price went down, but the term price went up. The long-term price for uranium went up from $68 last year to the low 80s. And everyone focused on the spot price. It went from 90 to 70. But, I think the real demand is in the term side of things. And that price has been quite robust.
That America at the moment has got very little involvement in heavy mineral sands. The big market for them is China. China is fairly actively involved in Africa generally. So for us, the route to market is probably pretty unaffected. It also appears that South Africa is becoming less and less a favoured partner of America's, which I don't think is great for South Africa probably in the long term. But in terms of our operation, it doesn't have a lot of impact. I would think in terms of price that prices will increase. At the moment it looks like, from my understanding, supply is going down and demand is increasing. So it's probably not a bad place for us to be.
So tantalum is historically a product that's used as an alloy for the hardening of metals. So oftentimes you'll see it used in aircraft alloys, weaponry, but it's also used as a resistor and a capacitor. So it's used in particular as a capacitor in a lot of electronic equipment. So the demand for that has been steady and steadily rising. Where we're starting to see a change is in the supply side. So generally in Australia, tantalum is a byproduct of lithium production. So as lithium production drops, tantalum production drops, and generally tantalum prices go higher. We're seeing over the past 12 months, tantalum prices have been relatively steady. And we think that has more to do with, while the production has dropped off, we believe that the demand has dropped off a bit too, primarily out of China. You're seeing fewer and fewer electronic goods, in particular from the Western manufacturers, being sold into China. And we think that's kind of kept the market relatively stable.